Welcome back, folks, to the conversation series on Get a Grip on Lighting. On this episode, Ronald Kuzmar and Webster Marsh interview Craig DiLouie about lighting controls. And guess what, folks? They're so good at it that Nailed is going to be putting out a separate podcast, Greg Ehrich, called the Lighting Controls Podcast. Look for it soon, late September.
That's right. Get ready for it. It's going to be hot.
And so, folks, listen, if you're listening to this, you got to go to KeystoneTech.com. That's KeystoneTech.com, the big easy. That's right, light made easy, KeystoneTech.com. Right now, I think we got Craig DiLouie. Yeah, it's Craig DiLouie coming in hot with Ronald Kuzmar and Webster Marsh.
Welcome back, everyone, to the conversation series on lighting controls on Get a Grip on Lighting. Today, we have a special guest here, Craig DiLouie. And by the way, I'm here with my co-host, Ron Kuzmar, just in case you don't get mentioned. But Craig, thanks so much for Craig, thanks so much for joining us today. Hopefully listeners will have heard the name Craig DiLouie in the past, but just in case, do you mind giving us a quick pitch on who you are and what you do?
Sure, absolutely. First of all, it's great seeing you again, Webster. Ron, it was great meeting you today, and thanks for having me on. It's great to be here, talk about lighting controls and education. My background goes back to the early 90s. I ended up working at an ad agency. Most of our clients were in lighting, doing lighting retrofit products, Magnatech, Lutron, Leviton, and so on. I ended up specializing young, which they say don't do, but I said this is where it's at in this firm. And so I was able to move up by developing a technical foundation in lighting and really just giving it the extra mile for these clients. Worked with organizations like Greenlights, Nalmco, Nailed, NASCO. I did a lot of magazine work for them, helping them to convert their newsletters into magazines. Ended up writing a book called Lighting Management Handbook for the Fairmont Press, which is affiliated with the AEE. From there, I was recruited to become editor of Architectural Lighting Magazine, where I served for 7 years. I was their editor, and then I ended up becoming the publisher of the Design Group, which was this big construction division that they had. And I may have, I like in Wall Street, they make fun of Bud Fox for being the shortest reigning airline CEO. I may have been the shortest reigning division head at Miller Freeman because we were almost instantly bought, and the new owner had products similar to ours. And so this was not going to, we were the conquered, so it wasn't going to go well. So I ended up leaving and starting my own thing. And I've been doing that ever since and loving every minute of it, working in my PJs at home. So before COVID made it cool. So I absolutely love the lifestyle. And I've been working with clients like the Lighting Controls Association, NEMA, Nalmco, Department of Energy, and then some. I do a lighting column for several magazines like TED Magazine and Electrical Contractor. I've worked with a lot of different other magazines. And then I also work with some select manufacturers. And then, of course, I have a second career, almost a second life, like in my alter ego that writes fiction. And that's really taken off in the last 10 years, and with some books published by major publishers like Simon & Schuster and Hachette. So it's been a wonderful journey, gratifying and humbling, I can tell you.
Sure. No, I mean, and thank you again for being on this show and for divulging some of your experience. But I mean, you've really had such this unique perspective on the industry from where you are. It almost feels like you're lofty above everything else writing about it. And so, it would be great to get your, 9,000 foot vantage perspective on the industry right now when it comes to lighting controls.
Yeah, and you nailed it in what I bring to the industry, which is that airplane view of the battlefield, where I have never fought in the trenches. I have no practical experience. I am an LC. I'm also a CLCP, but that's for me. And I've learned so much through osmosis and interviewing and reading reports that maybe other people just skim. I read the energy codes like line for line and compare them to the old one. And
Right.
yeah, I do all this. The industry needs somebody like that, I think. I'm glad to be able to do it. But my experience of lighting is entirely academic. So there are a lot of people in the industry. I'm always surprised what they know and what they don't know, and I think that they probably feel the same about me because we have totally different perspectives. And so I always love to hear okay. This is what I think. What does this actually look like on the ground? And they're like, no, it doesn't look like that at all. It looks
Right,
like
well,
this. And it's really good to do like a reality check and see where things are at. And that helps me temper what I'm saying. And, one person's point of view is one person's point of view. I'm not the guy who gets the life fair evaluation and responds to the one criticism, right? And thinks, oh, I have to change everything. But those things add up, and you take them seriously to try and feed them into that big picture view to see so that you incorporate perspectives from that level. And I think that's really useful. But as you can see, I'm kind of a long-winded guy, but I'm a writer, obviously. But to answer your question, lighting controls is obviously extremely well positioned in the lighting field. We just got done with the LED revolution, which arguably won the battle and is now the new ruling power, so to speak.
Right.
And as far as controls goes, that their revolution started a little while. There have been the overall revolution started a long time ago, but it's rolling out in these phases, and the next phase is one phase has already won, which is occupancy sensors. Occupancy sensors. It's a staple right now. Back in the 90s, it was like, the CEO, it turned off and the lights turned off. He was in the job, that kind of thing.
Right.
And now it's just like everybody does aux sensor. Everybody kind of knows how to do aux sensors, and that part of the revolution's done. We have daylight harvesting, a staple in new buildings, occupancy sensors. Now we have light reduction with LEDs being dimmable, easily dimmable. We have more granular control zoning. We have so many different. You covered this in a recent column we're going to publish soon, which is about the paradigm shifts happening. And it may be this big one, but it's made up of all these little ones. And the next one, I think, is obviously network lighting control. I think that network lighting control is already very popular, more popular than it's considered. And that's because of energy codes, and they're so layered and so detailed with controls. It's really actually simplifies things to go with a networked approach. But what a lot of people think of network controls isn't that's more like a room-based network system. But that this building level network control system where you're starting to pull data out of it, and you have a network infrastructure in there, and you're deriving IoT benefits, that is obviously still developing. And I think it has a pretty bright future. And I think besides that technological shift that's occurring, another big opportunity for controls obviously is in existing buildings. New construction is maybe 0.5 to 1 to 1.5% of buildings a year. The rest is existing, and they're aging, and a lot of them are still even using older lighting systems. An intellectual casualty of writing about this stuff is you think it's used more than it is. Like, I wrote about retrofits for the past 30 years, and I thought everybody's doing this. And then you see the DOE data, and it's like, wow, we've got a long way to go still. People are just going to grab onto those. They're not going to let go of those fluorescents for anything.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's another big shift that can occur as the rebate programs get behind network controls, and the energy savings becomes compelling, but more and more owners start to see the practical, tangible benefits of data and say, okay, that's worthwhile to invest in that along with an LED upgrade.
And so, I mean, from your perspective, you're really trying to speak to a wide base of people. You're not just trying to reach out to owners directly. You're trying to reach out to owners, contractors, designers, just making sure that the end user experience is benefited from the materials you're releasing out there. But it's interesting because a lot of people we've spoken to are saying, hey, we need more education, we need more materials, we need more information out there. But it sounds like you're putting out a lot of information. And so,
Yep.
how do we make sure that that connection happens between those people who are saying we need more education and people like you who are producing more education?
Well, when you look at a market for any product or technology, all the way over here you have they're definitely going to buy it, and over here you have they're never going to buy it, and everybody else is somewhere in between. So I think that when there's this thing about more education, it's more broader education, right?
Mm.
I think that we need to move that bar. So over here is people who will always buy, and they're the people that are really easy to talk to. They want to stay, they're investing the time to stay up to date, be educated, and lead in their field, make themselves more competitive by knowing what they're taking advantage of all the opportunities, taking more risks, being more knowledgeable, educating clients. Then you have the people here who are, they're they're waiting for that project to come along to kind of drag them into it, and they're busy. And so one of the perils of education is you sometimes find yourself talking a lot to these people who are leading the market. And so you have to always try and find ways to try and move it across. Like, examples with, I was writing about IoT and lighting for TED Magazine, which is the NAD publication, for a number of years. And this was a hot thing, and this is really cool and really newsworthy. So I gave it quite a bit of coverage. And then I did a survey on different lighting trends. And one of the questions was Internet of Things enabled lighting. And, and I got some flack back from some of the people taking the survey saying Internet of Things, that's stupid. How can you have an Internet of Things? And I'm like, okay, either there was definitely a fail somewhere in there.
Right.
And it really taught me about every time I write an article, let's take the LCA hat off and put on my journalist hat. Every time I talk to the industry, who am I actually talking to? Am I talking to the 20 who do the 80? Right. How do I get to talk to the 80? It's challenging. So, one of the things I'm trying to do is, like in Electrical Contractor magazine, I'm doing, the editor said, let's do a roundtable piece. And I was like, let's talk to manufacturers and get them to explain something that may be esoteric to the average electrical contractor, but is kind of really interesting. Like, let's have someone explain color rendition, and just in 200 words. So just give me 200 words, 3 minutes of your time, you're going to learn something you can take into the field. And then I did that with all these other questions. And so it's kind of this fundamentals thing, but it was delivered in such these little digestible pieces, and the manufacturers loved it. They got to show off their expertise. And I feel like everybody's going to win when that comes out. With LCA, we're kind of doing the same thing. We have Education Express. We have these really robust courses, but we're now asking people to sit down and read a course for X number of minutes or hours and take the quiz to get their education credit. And so we're now branching out into translating a lot of these into PowerPoint narrated videos. We're going to post to YouTube and connect to Education Express, and now you have a choice. And then I said, well, we need to go even further. I was saying this to the board, and I was explaining this whole theory about who we talk to. And I said to them, let's take some of our Education Express courses. Let's take a section on aux sensors, PIR versus ultrasonic, and just do a 5-minute YouTube video on that. Just parse it out. Really easy to do. And just have a ton of these things. Sort of a library of what does PIR mean anyway? Okay. Oh, okay. I get it. And here's how you apply it. And here's where they go. And hopefully try and reach the market that way, so that you have this spectrum, and you have these guys over here who always buy. And then you have the guys over here who maybe sometimes buy or maybe going to buy. Maybe you can move them over here a little bit more, because they feel empowered by the information, but they didn't have to flood out their brains getting it.
Ron,
Otherwise, just as a PS to that, I'm sorry,
No, go ahead.
is, with LCA, we talk to the everybody. And if you come to LCA, you're probably into it. Nobody's going to come to our website. I just love lighting controls, right? It always has to be bread and butter. How do I make myself more competitive? So I get promotions at my firm. So I serve my clients better. So my firm gets more money. So I put more food on, right? But so we talk to everybody, and it's first come, first serve. But we do a lot of outreach. So we write for magazines. For example, we have a special section coming out in BOM magazine in next month, which is on the topic of rebates for lighting controls. They're still there. They're as robust as ever, and there are now maybe 25% of the prescriptive lighting rebate programs now recognize network controls. And so that's all exciting stuff for the owner to understand. And then we were able to put in some other messaging, like there's a lot more the lighting control system can do for you other than save energy. You should check that out too. And so so we do a lot of that outreach. But again, once we're in BOM magazine, they may have their own, I can't speak for them, but they may have their own 20/80 rule,
Right.
People get it, people who have to be dragged along.
I mean, I imagine that that's pretty consistent throughout any reader base. You've got that rule of 20% you're speaking, almost preaching to the choir, and then 80% is really the group you're trying to reach out to. But I'm curious, Ron, because you're as an integrator, your boots on the ground, you're almost on the opposite end of the spectrum from Craig here. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on what Craig is talking about here with these bite-sized video clips, and whether you think there's a market for that.
Yeah, so I think it's fantastic, right? I think the idea of doing those short clips and making them more accessible, right, via YouTube and things like that, where contractors can find them easier, right? Because the LCA, right, there's not a lot. I'd be willing to bet most contractors know nothing about the LCA, right? I'd be willing to bet, because contractors don't join the LCA, so I'd be willing to bet contractors don't know much about it. They don't know about Education Express. So if you can find a way to put something out there that is findable through a quick Google search, right, where YouTube is going to come up with things like that, that's where you're going to start to gain viewership, and then be able to put the information in. And then when they go, okay, these people know what they're talking about, where does this take me to? It links them back to the right. And that's start to get that snowball effect. But putting those small clips out there is a huge way to get in front of people. Because let's be honest, at the end of the day, most people have the attention span of 90 seconds, 3 minutes, and they're gone. So if they're not getting the information they need, they're not going to stay engaged in the content.
Right. The danger of that, though, is now suddenly you want to, teach me everything about aux sensors in 5 minutes. It's like, it's not going to happen. But I can teach you PIR versus ultrasonic and where they go and how they work.
But that's enough to get people.
So that's the approach we're taking, sort of like all these little gateway drugs, so to speak, to controls. If I know this, okay, maybe I want to learn. Oh, okay. And then maybe they come in. But that whole idea of discoverability is spot on. Lighting, like I said, Lighting Control Association, we put out a lot of information. It's really good information, I think. It's very useful information. It can empower people to do better in their jobs and so on. But a lot of people aren't going to come to it unless they need it. They're not going to come to it because they want it. And maybe this will happen. They come to it because, oh, I got this. I got a question. So we do get a lot of Google searching. We show up really good in Google search results. And we get a lot of traffic that way, people coming through. I wish I could get more of them to stay, subscribe to the newsletter and engage with us on an ongoing basis. Sometimes it is just purely transom, but you did your job. They learned that one thing and they went back to their job, and that's a win for us. Maybe hopefully they'll remember us and come back the next time they need something. So
that's
you have
basically the business model that you have there for the Lighting Controls Association, because the manufacturers are your backers for Lighting Controls Association, and their goal is information.
Yes, I mean, naturally they all want to sell more products, specifically their products, but
Right.
you know, our position is we're Switzerland, so we want to treat everyone fairly, give everyone an opportunity to express themselves on the website. You know, if they have a new product coming out, we're going to tell people about it. But when we do education and things like that, or we write articles, we always write about a technology, and we don't show any favoritism one manufacturer or another. We also don't show any favoritism to one approach or another. Our whole goal is uh, to well, I guess in mercenary terms, it's to grow the market for lighting controls by helping customers become more educated. But that's not a bad thing to say. It's a good thing to say because everybody wins in that formula. But we're not here saying, oh, you got to do, oh, you're having a retrofit and you're changing out some T8s, you know, you have to do controls. Like, well, do you? You know, we want you to consider them, and we want you to consider them from an educated standpoint. And then if we can do that, we feel like we've won. Even if you know, if you're like, controls don't fit here, the RI is bad, or we don't see value, then don't. But we want you to at least know what the controls are, what your options are. Do they have a fit in this building or this space? And, you know, would this provide a value to the owner? We want you to ask these questions and consider it. And that we feel like that's our win, making sure you're educated so you can do that.
Well, and I think the other thing, you know, that's unique about the Lighting Controls Association is because there's so much documentation out there that tells you how to design with specific systems in mind. Because the manufacturers produce great educational materials on their specific product, but it's not genericized enough to be able to go, oh, yeah, a PIR sensor on any system is going to have similar functionalities. It's going to be this specific PIR sensor is going to operate this specific way. And so I think that's a really added value of the Lighting Controls Association's documentation out there. And I think one of the reasons why people stumble on the Lighting Controls Association through Google searches is because they're trying to flesh out some knowledge that they've piecemealed with the information that exists through other manufacturers. But really, this agnostic stance helps complete that knowledge.
Right. I mean, if you're going to specify any product, but particularly products that are more sophisticated, you're going to you're going to really want a foundation. Like, you know, what are these devices? How do they talk to each other? What are all the options for that? What are all the options for the devices? Or how does this device basically perform? What are the strategies which reflect inputs and outputs? Once you have that foundation, you're prepared to get product training in any system and know how it fits in with the overall big picture. And I think that's one thing we do.
So I'm curious.
Bring to the table.
I'm curious what, you know, based on that, is your idealistic perspective on educating people on lighting controls is not the format that we currently have, which is starting with a manufacturer in mind and then expanding out, but rather starting with the heuristics, the tools for learning, and then identifying manufacturers. Is that your ideal?
Well, whatever gets you to where you want to go makes me happy. But, you know, I think ideally, yeah, you would have a basic foundation in the field. It's really useful to know, you know, what an aux sensor does, what a photo sensor does, and what networking means. You know, they're just the basic definitions and knowing what this stuff does. That way you don't end up with a hammer seeing everything as a nail, right? You end up being able to, you have all these different size pegs, all these different size holes, and then you know exactly where you can put everything. And, you know, and then you can actually choose the products that do that, what you want the best. So we think I feel like we're really a necessary background. But, you know, people come to knowledge in many different ways, through osmosis, through, you know, all sorts of different things, ways. so we're happy if anybody's educated at any level
Mhm.
on controls technology. We just want to be their resource for when they want a broad scope foundational understanding of what's staples, the new, what's going on that's new, what requirements they may have by energy codes, what they documentation they produce when designing a system, and so on and so forth.
So, I mean, as a writer, trying to stay agnostic to all of this, all of what the manufacturers are doing with their statements, I mean, there's a lot of inconsistencies with definitions and nomenclature within our industry. So, I mean, is that a challenge for you as an educator, as a
Yeah, of
writer,
course.
to be able to maneuver? And so, would it be preferential to have some kind of consistency?
Yeah. NEMA has LSD, I think 64, but it's a bit outdated.
Mm.
That could probably be updated. Yeah, and then different manufacturers, they want to differentiate their products, right? So
Right.
the minute the generic term is described, they may want to come up with something else to say, well, this is ours, right?
Gotcha.
And so it's really challenging. I mean, I don't mind it because, when when I do my education, as long as I'm aware as an educator, or I'm writing an article as a journalist, as long as I'm aware of what all the possible terms are, then
Mhm.
I can say, here's the term I'm using, also known as, X, Y, and
Mhm.
Z.
Sure.
The problem sometimes is that the terms evolve,
Mm.
what kind of popular terms there are, and there seems to be some weird force behind it. Like, we don't call it a photosensor anymore, we call it a light sensor or a daylight sensor, which depends who you
Yeah.
talk. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'll call it a light sensor, and somebody else is like, what's a light? It's a daylight sensor. And I'm like, okay. And and then and then I'm like, I look back on, like, 800 pages of stuff I've written on this topic that says photosensor, and I'm like, should I go back and change it? And then I'm like, nah, it'll be fine. And what, because you're doing the best you can, as
Right.
long as it's defined and you're defining all the possibilities. But
Sure.
we do make some decisions about trying to correct certain nomenclature, like, for example, well, we call a light fixture luminaire, right?
Mhm.
Just it elevates the category a little bit of lighting. So we try and use but we don't always use illuminances and luminances and stuff like that. Um, no, I forgot I was gonna say
Well, I mean,
next
it
something
sounds
about the
like
terminology.
from yeah, from an accessibility standpoint, at least when you're talking about lighting controls, luminance versus illuminance may not be as critical. I mean, maybe in a situation where you have like a closed loop photo sensor that's picking up a task surface illuminance, you need to speak specifically about that. But
Yeah,
from a dimmer on the wall, brightness is brightness.
Mhm.
right. Yes.
So I
Oh, and,
mean,
and what I was going to say earlier was, some terms like commissioning. We want to make sure we kind of correct the record. Because commissioning traditionally has meant, we're starting up a system, or we're programming it, and that's part of the commissioning. Part of commissioning, and part of which is also part of the commissioning process, depending on
right.
which you want to use. But you don't want to confuse commissioning with startup, and you also don't want to confuse it with measurement and verification. So we do try and correct the record on some of the
Mm.
terminology that we use.
Well, and I think, there's also legal ramifications depending on which state you're in when you use that term too. I mean, California state has requirements for specifically commissioning, and they define it in their state.
Right.
Whereas out in, Wisconsin, for instance, they may not have as strict a definition for what commissioning and a commissioner is, at least when it comes to lighting controls.
Right.
And I
Right.
think that's another thing, is that we like to hijack words and use them for our own purposes. A commissioner, not excuse me, not related to lighting controls, is a completely different role and responsibility.
Right.
Similarly, to protocol. We refer to 0 to
Mhm.
10 volt as a protocol, and it's actually a method. So,
Mhm.
we like to repurpose words in a way that they weren't originally intended to be utilized.
Yeah. Sometimes though, it's that whole feeling of, you ever watch a subtitled film and sometimes a foreign language isn't as economical as English, and you're like, they're talking for a long time and then it's a really short sentence. It's sort of like that with lighting language too, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes you just need to shortcut it, because
Sure.
it's you're talking in the field and you just need to get things done.
Well, but I mean, coming from a specifier standpoint, that becomes challenging because there's jargon and then there's specifics. And so if
Right.
somebody's been taught the specifics of something and that specifics is actually jargon, suddenly your specifications aren't as airtight as you think they are.
Yes, and that's a really excellent point. If you're going to use the jargon, you should have a little filter, so you get the long part in the subtitles and your internal
Right.
subtitles, like that. Like, I know what you mean, but I actually do know what you
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, I
absolutely.
mean, photo sensor is a great example. I worked at a firm and we had like 2 hours discussing what to call it in our specs because, we were like, oh, well, it's not technically daylight. It's not. So, we went around it, but, picking the right word in your specs can really make or break a project. And so not
Yeah.
having clear definitions on terminology can be really hectic. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why we have people just lifting specs from manufacturers' sites.
Yeah, and sometimes, like you were talking about with code, it can have some interesting effects. For example, luminaire level lighting controls. DLC's position is basically you're embedding sensors and possibly control functionality into the luminaire. And IECC says, and Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance says, oh, it's wireless. And so, well, but a lot of manufacturers are like, well, we don't do wireless. So it's like, as soon as you want the definition to be general enough to accommodate product evolution and all the choices in the marketplace, making a decision somewhere, if someone has an outlier, is that an outlier or is that evolution? So you just want to be really careful about it.
Well, and I
So
think,
you want it to be general, but you don't want it to be too general, and so on.
well, and there's new words coming out all the time. So for instance, luminaire
Yeah.
level lighting controls. That's fairly new in the vernacular that everybody's using right now. So,
Right.
if we keep getting these new words thrown at us, the old words still need to be defined, but now we're coming up with definitions for these new ones as well.
Right.
So,
Right. But, which I think people can get through. But, when it comes to something like IECC, okay, does this mean it has to be wireless?
right.
If I do this compliance path that's based on LLC, I mean, maybe. Yeah, I would think it'd be up to the HJ, obviously, but
Well, yeah, of
that's
course.
how they
But I
define
mean,
it.
yeah, it's well, and that, having AHJs being able to determine what the definition is can also cause problems on a project because, in
Right.
some cases,
Ideally, it
code.
shouldn't come to that.
Right. Right. But
Yeah.
I mean, from a writer's standpoint, having worked with a number of these organizations, what is it like trying to push through a definition?
Oh, well, we're more in the, uh, and put it over here.
Yeah.
That's when it comes to that, that's kind of where we're at. We're
So it's
not
more of like
NEMA. NEMA does
NEMA comes
standards, and
out.
that's our
Yeah.
parent organization. So we serve at their pleasure. We're a council of NEMA. And so, whatever the NEMA definition is, that's what we say the definition
So
is.
you're kind of dependent
But
on them for
yeah,
this initiative to be taken.
yes and no. I mean, because LSD, again, I think it's 64. I'm not sure when the last time it was updated, but I think it has been a while. And but last time I looked at it, it wasn't entirely complete with some new technology that has come out. And so, so we sort of use industry vernacular and we sort of let it drift based on what I see, what I hear, it sort of congeals through osmosis, I guess. And I find myself favoring a certain term because it seems like everybody's on board with it. I just get that feeling.
Right.
But I'd rather not trust my feelings on it. But, that's just how it works and how it's always worked. So we just do the best we can.
I mean,
So is
go ahead, Ron.
no, so I'm just, going back to sort of the whole education piece, right? So I'll be honest, I didn't know about the LCA until a few years ago. And I think part of that was just based on how I was doing my own research and how I was searching for things and working with the manufacturers that I was working with. So how do you take that information now? And I like the YouTube video thing, and I think that'll help a lot. But how do you push the education out to integrators, designers, and various firms? How do you sort of create that outreach that you have the Learning Express and have this portal for all this education? Because I feel like that's something that I should have known about 10 years ago, but I didn't.
Well, first of all, integrators is a terrific, mysterious, brilliant market, and I would like to understand it better. But there's no lighting integrator magazine or anything or association out there, so it's really hard to. I keep finding that integrators. There are way more people who identify as one thing, but who happen to do integration than people who do integration. And so it's very hard. And then when it's integration, it's really hard to say, well, how much lighting do you do? Oh, tons. I'm really up on it. So it's really, you see them in the wild, but it's kind of hard to say what their natural, they're hard to identify, hard to find from the level I'm at at an association level. We would love to get more of them engaged with us, like in a big way. We want this. That would be wonderful. So we have put a little thing on, when you subscribe to our newsletter and we ask what kind of firm you are, we have integrator in there. We haven't gotten many takers on that, but I suspect that if I asked all those people, have you ever done integration? A lot of them would say, yeah, or a lot or a little, right?
Yep.
So I think that market's still developing. But as far as we do outreach, yeah, I mean, we're really lean organization. I call us the mouse that roared. So you haven't heard of us, but a lot of people have, and the fact that so many have is a testament to what we've been able to accomplish over about 20 years. Which is because LCA is really, it's me. It's like one guy. I work with the board very closely. They're terrifically engaged, real brilliant people. Gary Meshberg, Digital Lumens, is our vice chair. Charles Knufke at LeGrand is our chair. He's a really smart, and Jeremy Jans at Current. Just brilliant people. And then we have our terrific executive director, Michael Erbsfeld. And then we have the membership themselves. But as the bottle washer is me pretty much. And so for one guy in one group with the budget we have, I think we've accomplished a great deal. But we also have to be reasonable and rational about what we can accomplish with that kind of money. And, one guy. So we, the main thing is to try and be discoverable. So we produce a lot of very good information. We produce that regularly. We have a lot of original content. Google loves us. And so a lot of people have a question, they can come to us. So we get tons of transom traffic, and hopefully enough of them stay. There's stickiness, what they used to call, on the website, that enough of them stay. Hopefully they subscribe to our newsletter, or they join our LinkedIn group, which, God, is growing at 100 people a month. Even while our newsletter kind of goes down, LinkedIn's skyrocketing. We have almost 8,000 people now. In a year or two, we're going to have 10,000. It's crazy. Another thing that we do is all the outreach that we do. So we produce a lot of articles for magazines. We write for LEDs magazine, designing, lighting. We write for LD, have a column in LD&A, BOM magazine. We've been in Buildings magazine, a whole smart buildings, a whole bunch of different publications. And then all the blogs like Light Now, Inside Lighting, Edison Report. We do a lot of press releases, Energy Watch News, and so on. And that's all been really good. So we make a big splash, but again, how many people see that and say, I want to learn about lighting controls today? Some, not a lot.
Right.
Then the next thing we do is that I think is really valuable for us is we connect so well with other organizations. So we've invested in really good education content. We've registered with AIA. And then we say, hey, we're open for business to provide book learning about lighting controls that provides an excellent foundation in controls. And just all you gotta do is plug into us. And so CLCP in California was like, we love that. We're going to do live training, but we want them to have some book learning first. So they have to take 5-year courses. So CLCTP and NLCAA in California, that's what they do with us. So we get a lot of contractors coming through because of that. Then
Awesome.
you have, NCQLP recognizes us for LEUs. We just signed a deal with the Design Lights Consortium. They were deciding, well, we had this network lighting controls rebates for trade ally, you rebate trade ally programs. Do we want to develop? We have some live training on NLCs, but do we want to have this background in lighting controls first? Do we want to develop that? We said, don't do, why are you recreating the wheel? We have the wheel. So just connect to us and go wherever you, so they recognized us as an educator, and we now promote people to go learn about to get their live training on NLCs and learn about rebates that are available.
So I mean, to
And so
answer the question, you really kind of operate in this grassroots format. You really kind of just word of mouth, talk with individual groups, trying to find a way to provide a service that is educational, that meshes with what they're trying to do. So DLC is also sort of an educational group, but they focus on incentivizing initiatives as opposed to just here's some information. So
I mean, you guys may remember this, like maybe around 10 years ago, and we were, or maybe longer, but we were still in the traditional lighting era, and everybody kept coming out. We have this, we just came out with this new education program on lighting, and it teaches you about CRI, and a T5 is this diameter, and and just here's what an aux sensor does. And I wrote a lot of these things back then for different clients, and I was the whole time I was like, I feel like I'm, I guess it's good, but what if all these guys work together? Boy, that money they all put into this effort could really synergize. And so that's what a kind of LCA became on the control side. And so I look at it like LCA, and my first fervent wish is just let us educate the market about lighting controls. And you can have a say in that if you want. Like if you want to have input on our courses, we always want to be accurate, and we don't want to mislead people ever. So have it, we feel our education is good and fair and helpful. And all our surveys have found that is the case from thousands of people. And so our first wish is, you do what you do best. Like Namco did this. They have their CLCP certification. They wanted to promote this, but should they have developed their own controls curriculum? I don't think so. They came to us, and we now recognize them. They recognize us. You get these education certificates and take them to them. It's all very simple. And they get to do what they do best. And we're in talks with other organizations as well on this. And, we ended up doing the same thing with IES. We co-funded DG29. We co-funded LEM7. We co-funded Seminar 4. And we felt it was really useful. And it was so wonderful to do it through IES, because IES is, they have their TRC, they have their board, they have committees. They're going to look at every word, right? So which makes it even better, So and LCA was able to help fund those documents and get to help write them. And again, just don't recreate the wheel. We should all be working together for the cause of educating practitioners.
So I mean, I guess the message here is, if somebody says we need more education, it's we need more LCA involved in other groups providing that
Right.
education, because that education is ready to be tapped into. It's just not being tapped into in an efficient or well-known manner yet. And so the more we can raise
Yeah.
awareness to the existence of the Lighting Controls Association, the more hopefully people can learn about lighting controls in a free forum, essentially.
Yes, but anytime, any kind of outreach has an inherent terrible efficiency.
Mhm.
Look how many LDNAs are stacked up on your desk. How many have you read cover to cover so far?
Right.
If you've read them all, you probably have, Webster.
Well, yeah.
Haven't you?
Let's not belabor that. We all know I'm a
Okay,
complete nerd.
bad example. But me, I get LDNA and it just sits there, and then all of a sudden I'll go through a bunch of them. I'll be like, what do I need to know? And I think a lot of people, they just stack up, especially if they don't have as many plane rides in the quarantine era as they used to. That's when a lot of magazine reading got done back in the day I was with
Yeah,
Architectural
fair
Lighting.
enough.
It was favored plane reading. And so, and then, but in the digital era, it's the same. You send out a newsletter. Only so many people are going to open it. They're busy.
Yep.
They're on vacation. Something happened. And it's the same with or if you say you do big outreach, say you get a magazine placed in, this is the greatest magazine a control article could be in monthly, and you get an article placed in there, and then only so many readers are going to end up reading that, and then only so many of those people are going to say, you know what, that rings a bell with me, I need to know something. And then only a percentage of those are going to say, okay, now I need to go learn this in my busy day when I have 10 things to do, and half the time I need to do it.
Really,
And
we
so
just need like that
there it
matrix
is.
thing to and then you can download.
Yeah, exactly. That would be nice.
But I think
absolutely.
to your point, I mean, with the bite-sized video clips, I mean, that really does kind of tap into modern stylings of education right now. For instance, through TikTok, a lot of people love learning stuff through TikTok, and so it almost replicates that model. And hopefully, we will be able to see more knowledgeable people about lighting controls as a result of that.
I can see it now.
Yeah.
Craig doing the LCA TikTok.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to do them, make them entertaining. I mean, that's kind of the hard part, right? Like,
Yep.
you have a YouTube video, you're gonna have PowerPoint and a guy talking, but it's a different format and it's short, and you learn one thing and you're out. So that's our bet, that's going to work. But it's really, putting a huge amount of production value into stuff that might change with technology, and they have this maintenance thing with it. It's expensive, and I'm not really sure how much benefit you are getting. So one of the things we like to do is, because we are lean, and it is one guy with a board, and the board's really progressive, and they're brilliant, actually, is we love to just brainstorm spaghetti against the wall ideas. So one of the things was like, hey, we need to do, maybe we should be on YouTube more with these courses. So I converted a couple, put them to YouTube, and we were getting terrific results. We're getting a lot of views. And so then I was like, okay, now we need to convert Education Express, or at least the lead courses, to PowerPoint. And we're doing that this year. And then I was like, well, people want these bite-sized things. They want shorter and shorter. So let's do that. So now we're going to experiment. We're probably going to do maybe 10 videos, little 3 to 5 minute videos, and throw them up like spaghetti on a wall, and then see what happens. And because of the digital era, the wonderful thing is, and we're not married to a certain production value. We're an association. We're small. We get it. we're not trying to be anything we're not. So, or outspend or like spend above our means. And so we feel like the information is the most important thing, not being fancy about it. And so we can do that kind of thing and cheaply and efficiently and see what kind of feedback we get. And if we, for this 5 or 10 videos we throw up there, if we get a good response, we're going to throw 50 up there. And then we're going to see what happens, right? Yeah. But because we see this as a long game, we're not going to lose this year if we don't get 80% of the market knowing our name. We're going to, and I wouldn't even argue that's even like, let's say we are only talking to 20% of the market. Well, those 20% of the market they're active in controls, so they're making money on it, obviously. So they're doing a lot of the specifications and installations and so on, right? And then because they are on these projects, they're using terminology and ideas that are permeating to other people. So there's a much bigger influence. And I'm not even going to call it a pebble in a pond. Picture more like a rock, because that's what this is. We're constantly feeding. And it just ripples outward. And so I think we're far more influential, even if someone hasn't heard of us. They may have heard of our ideas, and they may have absorbed something that we've said or produced. Or they may even have gone to our website, because we're usually the first to describe the control requirements in a new code. Like IECC comes out within a month or two, we have an article explaining it, what's different. They may have seen those articles and then just moved on and not bothered to find out what the name was. So I feel like we have a lot of influence out there, even beyond what we have. But the influence that we do have is considerable. We do surveys every 2 years of our regular site users, and we've asked them, what do you think of the site? And we always get very high marks. We always ask what we can do better. We get some great ideas. And then we ask them, did your exposure to LCA influence your choice of control strategies or design thinking? And a majority always says yes. And then a majority always says, yeah, that it also influenced what products we picked. And then another majority says, yep. And we actually ended up specifically specifying LCA members because we've been to your site. So we're just like, okay, that's really good. Now, as far as getting the whole world, this is a very long game, gentlemen. Very long game.
No, it is.
We've been playing this game for 20 years. Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead.
But don't be afraid with some of the videos to start at the beginning, right? As boots on ground.
Yes.
And this may shock you, right? You would be amazed at how many electricians still don't understand 0 to 10, right? And to us, it's such a basic concept, right? But so many electricians still don't understand it. They've never. Just last week, I encountered an electrician, 0 to 10 on the project. He had never done 0 to 10 before, right? And it's just so. When you think about doing those videos for the broader outreach, right? You don't necessarily need to hit the 20%. You want to reach that 80%, bring them into your site, and doing some simple videos on 0 to 10. It doesn't even need to have a lot of PowerPoint behind it. It could be a 3-minute practical video on how to wire a fixture and, to the controller. And hey, if you go to turn it on and the lights dim down, you probably flip the polarity on your 0 to 10. And then look, now magically it works. And, so I wouldn't be afraid to think about keeping things simple and starting at the beginning for some of those.
Yeah, I totally agree. The videos that we would do would have to be a mix of two things, I think, to get attention. One would be fundamentals, right? Like, I keep hearing PIR. I have no idea what they're talking. I'm going to look that up. Oh, PIR. Right. What is that? 3 minutes.
Which we haven't actually told anyone what that means yet, for anyone who's been listening to us the entire time.
Good point, Ron. What is PIR?
Passive infrared.
Passive infrared.
Yeah. So
and if you want to learn more about that, go to LCA.
Yeah, exactly.
We're almost out of time.
We'll be on YouTube soon with that, or come to Education Express. But looking at it as a long game, we've educated probably 40,000 students, as it probably will reach by the end of this year. 40,000 students since we launched about 10, 15 years ago, Education Express. And
That's incredible.
so 35,000 people in the industry is nothing to sneeze at. And they have combined taken 400,000 to 500,000 learning modules. So that is just a huge number of hours of education. And then we've had about 70% of those take a test to test their comprehension, which means they're engaged. And it also means maybe they, are hoping to get education credit they can take to the state of California. We're recognized by them as a continuing education provider, or some other state, board, or, for some other purpose, like CLCP.
Right.
And so we feel like, yeah, it adds up, over the years. And if you look at a website our size too, we get like over 100,000 people coming to the website a year. So we always want to do better. Absolutely. So yeah, again, two things, we feel like we're doing good. We feel like we could do better, and we're always open on ways, we can do that using with the available means.
We're just about out of time, but I just want to kind of encapsulate what we've discussed here, because education is such a thing that people like to point to and say, oh, we need more of it, and I mean, the thing is that there are groups such as the Lighting Controls Association that are trying to provide education. There's actually a sustainable model to allow this to happen, and it's just a matter of making those connections and making the industry more well-rounded in the sense of knowing where to go for the information that you're seeking, instead of having to go into Google and typing, okay, what is 0 to 10? It's a control component. Go to lightingcontrolsassociation.com. There you go. There's your information. So, it's more, I would say, awareness that we need rather than education. We need awareness of where to go for the information we're seeking, because like you said, NEMA's got standards, IES has standards, ANSI has standards. I mean, all these standards exist. It's just, are they accessible? Not to the layman, not to the common people who are actually seeking that information out. So having groups like what you're doing with Lighting Controls Association is essential to being able to give accessibility to those sorts of things. And so, that's really the underlying conversation going on here. And correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's absolutely spot on.
Well, thank you so much.
We want to educate more people. We're just gonna keep doing it, and find different ways to be in front of them when they have a need for information, to say, God, I wish or what is that? Or I wish I knew this. Here it is. And, and then bring them in and hopefully convert them to someone who wants to become more and more educated in something that if they show proficiency, hopefully will benefit their careers and the firms they work for, so they're more competitive.
Well, Craig, thank you so much. Really appreciate you coming on and talking about all of this, because I think, the work you're doing is really incredible and helpful for our industry. And hopefully some people listening to this will check out the work you're doing.
Yeah, we all are welcome at the Lighting Control Association. And I want to say thank you to you guys for a great conversation. I really appreciated the opportunity.
Hello, folks. I'm just coming at you here to finish up the show from the gorgeous hills of Southwest Uxbridge, just north of Toronto, Canada. And I'd like to tell you about our good friends at Keystone Technologies, the Big Easy, Light Made Easy. That's KEYSTONETECH.com, Greg Ehrich.
So easy, you can sit poolside and get work done, selling light bulbs, Keystone style.
Yeah, if you can't beat them, join them. Everybody seems to be on vacation in Ontario right now. So you know what? I just rolled up to the pool. It's so beautiful out here. It's so nice. And so I'm just going to absorb the rest of the summer. But we got to give some props to Webster Marsh and Ron Kuzmar, along with Craig DiLouie on the Lighting Controls podcast. Those guys are so awesome that Nailed has decided to give them their own podcast, Greg Ehrich. It's going to be called the Lighting Controls Podcast, and it's coming out at the end of September.
It's going to be hot. You got to be ready for it. Good stuff. And something every lighting professional needs to be prepared for.
So get at it. Lighting Controls podcast coming out hot. Thanks to Keystone Tech and Craig DiLouie for being on the show. And congratulations to Webster Marsh and Ron Kuzmar. Good job, guys.